Hey everybody, Tag Life Done Free. Hey, here's the long-awaited second part of the group dynamics videos on the crew. And if you recall, the first video we did just a general overview. The second video we talked about the mind, which was the big outer circle. The third interview we talked about the mag, which would be your inner circle, your middle circle, and then finally the crew. And this is the second video on the crew. In this video, we cover the things like governance and sovereignty and property rights, and these are all super important things in keeping a group together. So anyway, I hope you enjoy it. Come on, let's check it out. Well, welcome back, everybody. Say hello to Mr. Spags, Mr. Data, Brother Hitch. Now, today we're going to talk about, the community. This is video 4, part B, I guess, because we didn't get all that far in the part A. But before we get going, I'm just curious if Hitch, do you always wear your wife's shirts?
This is actually a man shirt. It says "Chicks Dig Pickups."
Oh, okay.
So if you see a woman wearing this, might be she's seeking attention from the same team. But no, this is a men's shirt.
Okay, got it. Well, and it's good to see that Data's drinking Kool-Aid as usual.
Mm-hmm. Signature.
Right. All right. So where we left off last time, we were talking about why to have a community, and that video did real well and had lots and lots of questions. So today we're going to start off with governance and rules, or loose confederation. And so, Bobby, let's start with you. Why don't you just give us a kind of a sit rep of that?
Yeah. As you know, I'm a voluntarist.
Yeah. What's that? I said, what's the difference?
Yeah, as you know, I'm a voluntarist. I believe that all human interaction should be voluntary. But I also understand that we as human beings are a communal animal. And there is a definite give and take when it comes to group dynamics, where sovereignty still is at the forefront of each individual person, but at the same time, people are willing to compromise for the betterment of the group that they have decided to survive with. You can't have just a bunch of selfish individuals and a group. It won't ever work that way. So you have to kind of learn how to compromise and know when to compromise, know when to stand your ground, and understand that, well, if not, then what are you doing in a group to begin with?
Yeah. So are you more fond of the, make sure I got this worded right, of the, more strict governance, or more the loose confederation?
The group I am a part of and have been for, 17 years now, we have a very specific set of rules by which we voluntarily abide by. But those rules have evolved over time, because when we first started, most of us were in the military. So we just kind of had that mindset, and it was very strict governance. But we learned very quickly that when you involve people who aren't in the military, they're not going to play by that set of rules. And so you have to figure out how to have good governance of a group and how to view that governance. And for us, we had to learn that governance is not about authority. It is not about being in charge. It is about management. And when we started looking at things from more of a managerial perspective and less of a governance perspective, it started to work very well. Mm-hmm. One really good example. Okay, we all pay a fee monthly to be a member of the group that we're in, and that way we have things that we spend money on communally, specifically to build our bug out locations better. But there are also things that we will not spend money on that each individual is specifically required to do themselves. It's your stuff is your stuff. So initially we started out where every month you had to pay a certain amount of money per person. Then we realized very quickly that life happens and sometimes people can't pay. Well, does that mean all of a sudden the people you value don't have a vote, that they don't have a say? And we realized that that's really not conducive to a voluntary system. And so now we have a vestment period where it's still a certain amount per person per month, but you have forever to pay it. Mm-hmm. So for us, it's a 10-year period of X amount of dollars per person per month for 10 years at the current rate. Once you hit that, you're done. And you can take as long to get there as you want. Everyone understands that people have hardships in life that might preclude you from paying your $10 this month. But at the same point, you should have, at least at this point, when you get to this level of a group, you shouldn't have people anymore that you're worried about whether they're going to make a payment 6 months from now. You should already be at a certain level of trust where that's really not an issue. And so we took that rigid set of rules we started with and we modified it over the course of, like I said, the 17 years we've been around. And now it's a very loose set of rules. There are still rules, there are still guidelines, but it's not like there's any punitive action if you miss your payments for a few months. You just tell us, hey, I'm having a hard time. We understand it. You pay when you pay. And all the other rules we have are very similar. You can try to do the rigid rules. You can try to pretend like you're a drill sergeant, and it just isn't going to work. Unless you have a group of nothing but former military guys, it just isn't going to work that way. So you have to learn how to modify things to address family members and spouses and children who didn't grow up in that rigid system that a lot of us have.
Yeah. So Hitch, loose group or tight group?
In the other world, I may be involved in a political party quite a bit because I live in the reality of the other world, that I have to abide by certain rules because I have no choice. I was forced into a contract at birth, and that's my only way to interact in the other world. But in this world, I'm an absolute anarchist. Pure. Just like my marriage would be, like my household, absolute anarchy. And I don't want to get too far down the rabbit hole about anarchy, but a really quick way to explain that, in the household here, no one is the defined absolute leader of everything. It's, if something needs to be done, whoever's got the better skill set related to that or the better ability to complete the task steps up and is the leader, and everyone else follows along, and we solve the problem and move on to the next one. But so it's not the chaos that some people think anarchy is, because there's a lot of confusion about what anarchy is. Mr. Spags could probably speak to that quite a bit, and we could have a whole show on that at some point. But yeah, I mean, I don't ascribe to the governmental side of things in this. It's it kind of goes against my grain.
Yeah. So do you think that inside a community there should be set rules, or it should be loosely defined and you live under your own set of rules and you just,
sure,
hang out when it's
so fun? Yeah. So, my situation is a lot different than some other people's situations. I came at this with some means. I own a good chunk of property that I've had for, years and years. So there's a lot of people that are involved with me in a tribal aspect that, rely on my location as their fallback position. But at the end of the day, we're fairly evenly yoked. We all have lots of great things we bring to the plate. I just that can answer your question, or maybe dig further if you need more answers there.
Yeah, more what I'm getting at is, do you think that a group should be governed? That, like Bobby was talking about, how that there's a fee, which I love the way you worded that, Bobby. That there's a particular set of rules and people should have a particular standard. You got to have X, Y, and Z. I mean, it's just the basics, and that we're going to, as a group, we're going to spend money, and as a group, we're going to do these things, versus the loose confederation of, I'll take care of me, you take care of you, and if you need something, holler. Right?
Yeah, I'm more loose confederation than in those two options there, because at the end of the day, there's some people that I really, really want to be here, but their chances of getting here would be timing. If something really bad happens, they can't leave their business or whatever it is they're doing, in another state, in another part of the country. They invest some money here as they can, and invest in themselves as much as they can. But odds are they're going to show up here at the close on their back, and their monthly involvement or weekly involvement in what we got going on here is fairly limited. Well, they're good friends. I talk to them a lot, you bet, but we don't have a lot of formality. We just and the people that are closer to where I'm at, you know, of course, we have a huge amount of involvement, but we have a very loose confederation of, hey, I get this machine. If you need to borrow it, let me know. You know, if you break something on it, you know, of course you're going to pay for it, repair it, or whatever. You know, I don't know. You know, some of my group members, likewise, it's, I've got extra tomatoes this month. You want some? Yeah, you bet. I've got extra eggs. Cool. We're not really keeping a tally, you know, but we have that kind of relationship that we've established where there's not a measure there. So it's pretty loose.
Yeah. Okay. Data.
In terms of how I feel in regards to like a more strict structure versus what is it, more of a loose confederacy? Is that the question?
How should a community be governed?
Yes. Well, I mean, obviously that's going to be very direct to the community, you know, and everybody's community is going to align with the properties of the people that they sought out to, you know, surround themselves with. So that's going to vary for person to person. But for me, I mean, personally, all of you guys in this video, you guys know me. I'm kind of you know, a loose Confederate kind of guy myself most of the time. I mean, I try to be fluid. All of you guys know I try to be fluid. I try not to be rigid. You know, so for me, I think in terms of governance in a community, you strive for voluntarism, but you settle for feudalism. And the reason why I say that is because essentially you kind of have to balance between both, I think. I've never lived that life, but I know those who have. I grew up from, you know, in a household from a mother who lived it. And so there was kind of a whole lot of anarchy that went on in the jungles over in the Philippines, but there was also a lot of, you know, I guess governance that went along there as well. So I kind of think that you have to walk that thin line between both. I think you have to find some balance between voluntarism and feudalism. I think you have to have some structure. I think you have to have some sort of organization and leadership role that at the, you know, at the dire time, there's a command structure that this person who orders people over the hill, and the people follow, you know, the orders over the hill. Does that make sense?
No, it makes perfect sense, which is really what I'm trying to get at, is that, you know, there's a difference between the world we live in today and the world that we would live in had the shit hit the fan.
Yes.
And if that event ever does come, the world of a whole bunch of individuals doesn't work very well. Because, yes, you know, there's a lot of things to get done. Someone has, and Hitch talked about this a little bit earlier about how on a particular topic, somebody's got to be in charge. Somebody's got to say, hey, we got to go get supplies, whatever it is, right? I mean, somebody at some point, there has to be some set of virtues or some set of governing structure that I think that a group lives by, even if it's just something so simple as 4 rules: don't lie, don't cheat, don't steal, whatever, you know, I mean, just some very basic parameter. But I think there has to be some there, because guys, I can tell you that I've been part of a lot of groups, and I've seen in almost every single case of the ones that broke apart, they broke apart because of sovereignty. At the end of the day, that's what it was. I mean, there was a lot of catalysts that went along the way, you know, data, you know, there was a time where there was a big conversation that talked about, in the event of a real event, that all supplies would be gathered and taken away, right? Remember this conversation?
Sure.
Okay. And it caused huge issues.
Yeah.
Absolutely huge issues. Like, no, you're not. And they're like, well, you know, except that if something happens and we're all together, we've got to figure out a diet and a rationing plan and blah, 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 blah. And anyway, so it was that sovereignty that I think that really caused a lot of people, you know, a lot of problems. And so I think that would be my next question. And I'll go kind of in the backwards order. So how does the governance of a community change post an event, Data?
Well, I think again, this is a very, very broad brush to paint with in having this conversation here, because it's, again, reflective to the people you surround yourself with, you know. And if you're in an anarchist or anarchical society, if you're in a, you know, a tyrannical society, if you're in a governance society, if you're in a, you know, law-abiding society, whoever it is that you've currently aligned with or sought to surround yourself with, I think you're going to follow in suit. I think the natural leaders will inevitably step up in those roles, and people will fall in line. I think people will toe the ropes that they either are voluntarily or involuntarily forced to toe, especially when it comes down to, well, the soup kitchen line is over there and it's very long, and you're welcome to go help yourself, but here we all have a role, blah, blah, blah. So I think having some semblance of governance in place prior to, or at least an established pecking order, and in which most of the time, if you've made it to the point where you're having the conversation like this in terms of intergroup dynamics, you already know what that is. Everyone already knows, at least on a subconscious level, where they fall or where they perceive others to stand and lead and not lead. So
yeah, Hitch, you got a comment on this?
Yeah, so maybe as I was thinking about this while we're talking, anarchy is not every man for himself, right?
Right.
If you think of tribalism and how various in times past various tribes would work together, and there was a group of people, two groups here, and they have somebody that kind of stands as a leader that they sort of self-appoint so that these five all get along. But then something happens and they have to come together, right? And so now they're 10, but they have these two guys or two women or whatever, that are were kind of decision makers when they were 5 apiece, that kind of have to now form something that they're going to work together. Or if there's 3 groups of 5 or 5 groups of 5 or whatever, but you don't have this direct democracy of, if there's 5 groups of 5, 25 people all rabble, right? These people appoint this guy, these people appoint this guy, they come together, and now they work out. This is a representative type government, but it's all small, right? It's all very, very small. So then they can go back and they're at their tribe and they're at their tribe, and they're making individual decisions inside their tribe. There's no central government off in the hills somewhere, or somebody else making decisions and calling shots that lives, like in today's society. There's not people in New York making decisions for people in Los Angeles, or both New York and Los Angeles making decisions for the entire Midwest, where there are clearly, if you've ever been in all 3 places, there's clearly 3 different types of living. There's different types of environments, different types of circumstances, and most people in each of those ones don't really know a whole lot about the other. Whereas in what we're talking about, very, very small, loose collectives in a small area, and we're getting along. And in turn, that could work in a grander scale. And now I'm going to go on and broadcast about why anarchy is great. But in a broader scale, then these groups and these groups and these groups get together, and then they start talking to the Kansas group talks to the Nebraska group talks to the Iowa group, and we figure out how to solve problems without having to step on each other's toes. And in a way, in a perfect world, even in austere times, I really think that's how it works. And Mr. Data, to speak to what you're talking about, feudalism, it's also very similar to, the aspect of there can be some strength and power amongst these people. So when some tyrannical person rises up and decides that I'm king over all this area, okay, well, you and what army? Well, we have our army that might stand against you, and we have our people that'll step forward. That may be the guy that leads the charge over the hill of, these guys out of each group goes off and fights the battle while some portion of the group stays behind. I mean, these are all real things. This is all real stuff that can and will happen in austere times when things get bad.
Yeah, Bobby.
Think of a church. A church is the perfect example of how you have anarchy and yet a structure of rules. There's no rule that says you have to go to church, and yet it exists. You have your bishop or your priest or your preacher or your rabbi, who's the person that is looked to by the congregation to lead that flock. And yet he doesn't hold a gun to your head, right? There's tithe at church, but no one forces you to pay it. If you don't pay it, the church doesn't kick you out. The church is a perfect example of a decentralized private institution where you can have both perfect autonomy. 6 days of the week, you're running around doing whatever you want. And for 22 hours on Sunday, you run around, do whatever you want. But for 2 hours, you come together for a common reason and a common goal. You sing your songs, you do your praise, you pray to whatever deity you pray to, and then you go home. And yet everybody is still a member of that church for the other 6.5 days of the week. Everybody still has a vested interest in how that church works. Everyone there has a little bit of a say in the color of the carpet that the building committee is choosing to put in. But like Hitch said, you have specialities, right? The preacher of a Baptist church doesn't also run the Sunday school, and he also doesn't run the kitchen, and he doesn't run the building committee, and he doesn't run the guy who mows the grass. Everybody has a role to play, and you voluntarily come together of your own free will, and you are willing to, for a few hours, put your sovereignty on the back burner for the common good of that church. And I think that if we look at governance in the same way that religion has looked at church for a very long time, and of course, I know you're going to throw, or someone can throw the example of the Roman Catholic Church during the 1400s. Okay, one off. In the 21st century, right? Nobody in the Kansas Baptist Convention is putting a gun to your head to go to church and chaining the Bible to an altar and making sure you can't read it, right? We've learned from the mistakes of the past. Religion, in many ways, have learned from the mistakes of the past, and we would do ourselves a very solid justice by learning from a structure that, in spite of its hiccups over 4,000 years, is still here and is probably the best prime example of an anarchist society that still has rules, that still has a code that you're supposed to live up to. And in many ways, that code is self-enforced. Take adultery. The preacher isn't going to your house if you cheat on your wife and beating you over the head with the Bible. But the teachings that you supposedly believe in and the code that you have voluntarily subjugated yourself, it will prick your conscience and it will make you feel the guilt of doing something you're not supposed to do. And that's where repentance and all this other stuff comes in when it comes to the church. It's a system of voluntarily atoning for your own sin, right? I think a preparedness group runs very similarly. Okay, if at some point Pastor Richard over here decides, well, I'm going to paint the building and do the carpet my way and no one else in the church gets a say, they're going to fire him, right? Your authority in these positions is completely made up. And the only reason you're in that position is because people put you there and have faith and trust that you can do the job. But the minute you step out of line, there's nothing that would prevent you from being removed from that position as well. And it's the same with a preparedness organization. If you have a group like my group's been together for 17 years and I have been in leadership positions most of that time. But at some point, if I start doing my job horribly, they're not going to vote for me next time. It holds true to virtually everything else. If the medic can't do the job of the medic anymore, you're going to find a new medic. If the guy who's your armorer all of a sudden gets both hands whacked off in an unfortunate smelting accident, you're going to find a new armorer, right? And that's just how it works. It is 100% voluntary. It is ultimately governed, I guess you would say, by the tenets of what Brother Hitch calls anarchism, which I would agree with him on. But at the same point, you voluntarily subjugate yourself for the better cause of the group. Because if not, it's not a group. It's just a bunch of dudes running around with tactical gear thinking they're cooler than they are.
Yeah, Bobby, unless I misunderstand, your theory's flawed. In my opinion, it's flawed because when you're talking about someone going to church or not going to church, whether they show up or not is not a matter of life or death. Whether they show up or not is not a matter of whether somebody eats or not. And whether they show up or not has no material effect on the outcome. If the shit ever hits the fan and someone doesn't show up for watch, or someone isn't doing their job, or someone isn't pulling their weight, I don't see how that works. Like a church.
The same way it works there. If the deacon doesn't show up for a few weeks, you fire him.
Mm-hmm.
It's very easy. It's not flawed. It works just fine.
Hitch, go ahead.
You just have to learn how to tailor it to the group of people you're with. All that this is a loose outline, right? Mm-hmm. And you can take a loose outline and apply it to any story you want, but the story gets told differently by different people. Mm-hmm. What you put onto that skeletal structure of an outline is up to you.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Hitch.
And, in support of Bobby, the Pareto principle is always in force. For those of you who are not familiar with the Pareto principle, it's Pareto, and sometimes known as the 85-15 rule. 15% of any given group, committee, government, whatever, does most of the work. 85% are free riders who show up sometimes, occasionally, or never. And I think the same is going to be true of groups. And it's not a concrete thing where it's always the same 15%. It goes back to the leadership thing. There's going to be people that are more enthusiastic about digging the latrine than there are going to be others in a group. And there's going to be people more enthusiastic about gardening than others. Mm-hmm. There's going to be some people that maybe really don't shine in your group for a while until things change in their life or their household or whatever. This is why the previous discussions we've had are so important about picking great people. And so the various churches that I belong to in my life, speaking of churches, there's seasons for people, there's seasons, and people show up and work, and sometimes they don't. But I think the church is a fantastic analogy. And yeah, I mean, I really like that analogy, because again, it's, you all share a belief system. Well, everyone in your group shares a belief system. And like Bobby said, if there's someone that's not towing their weight, the elders of the church are going to, speak to them. Maybe the pastor is going to speak to them, the priest is going to speak to them, say, hey, what's going on, man? And then that's when we discover, oh gosh, the guy's in a really, really bad marriage, and we didn't know how bad it was, because it looked great on the outside, but on the inside, holy cow. Mm-hmm. Didn't we help each other out? We step up and help each other out, just like a church, right? Just like a church. When someone needs help, you step up. So yeah, I don't know. Back at you, Tag.
It's fine. It's fine. Well, part of one of my roles is to try to get all sides argued, right? But Data, real quick, you had some very interesting facial expressions when all that was going on. You want to comment?
Unless you're talking about 14th century Catholics, or even currently very persuasive 17-year-old elderman from Utah, man, I'm just saying, bro, no, I think the church analogy is fine. It's, it is, again, it's applicable to your situation, I think. And really, again, my algorithm's not going to work for you. Your algorithm's not going to necessarily work for me, but there are components of it that I will take value in, or, you will take value from me, and eventually it will be incorporated into your algorithm, and it will become your algorithm. And someone else will see that, and they'll say, oh, that's a cool idea. And then it becomes theirs. And you guys all know this. And I think in a leadership role, like, we're discussing here, a structured role of a group like this, I'm not going to make any, claims about how I think it's going to be, or how I think I'm going to be. I mean, I think I would like to think that people would all do the right thing, when the time comes. But you and I also know that, people are inherently human, so.
People who are inherently human get very hungry very fast.
This is true. We've always argued this, that it is inevitable that supplies will run out, and good people will do horrible things when their children are starving.
I meant the obverse of that too. We're talking about a group that's, at this point, you should have already vetted folks. At this point, you're not dealing with people you don't know.
Yes.
So, I mean, let's say day one, the asteroid strikes, Yellowstone goes up, and you and your group have been fortunate enough to put away 2 years worth of food for everybody in the group. Well, okay, so you start eating the food, then one guy stops working a little bit. Well, when he comes to the ration line, the ration cook gives him a little less because he's not pulling his weight. People are going to get hungry, and people will fall in line. This has been proven throughout history forever. People eventually will start to do the things they need to. Look at Jamestown. When Jamestown was first established, it was a socialist colony. People don't realize that, but they had an everyone gets equal, because we only have so much. Everyone gets the same ration. And then they realized, like what Hitch said, 80% of the people stopped pulling their weight because, shit, I'm getting my ration anyway. And so Jamestown very quickly reversed course and adopted what now is known as free market capitalism, where everybody according to what they put in, and people shaped up real fast. And the rest is history. Here's the United States, right? It worked. As flawed as people are, the fact of the matter is, every decision is an economic decision. And when you start to look at it that way, you will realize very quickly it is not hard to incentivize people when they need to be incentivized, and you don't have to be a dictator or a tyrant to do it.
So Bobby, who decides?
That depends on your group. With our group, you vote in new leaders every 2 years, and whoever happens to be in that seat when the asteroid hits is who's in the seat.
Yeah.
But these things change, things morph. There's no hard, fast rule that says you have to do that forever.
No, I think what I'm getting at is, by your example of the food line, somebody is making a decision that person gets less of a ration, right?
Sure. In our case, it would be whoever the commanding officer was.
Which means there's governance.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
No one said there's no governance.
Mhm.
We just said that under anarchy and voluntarism, you have governance. It's just different than statist governance. No one's holding a gun to your head.
Yeah. When I think to Hitch's point too about, the 85-15 rule, where 15% of the people do most of the work. I think the tolerance or the length of rope for people not pulling their weight gets much, 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 much shorter when you have to produce everything for yourself.
Sure.
You can't really afford it much. Now, all of us are going to have the grandma that shows up, and then, right. I mean, we're all going to have some of that stuff that goes on, but
or you're going to get sick, or you're going to break your ankle. You're going to break your wrist. You're going to break a finger. You're going to break a collarbone. You're going to get sick for, weeks, maybe even months.
I never get sick.
Well, you don't today.
You get sick and tired.
No, that's true.
Yeah, you don't get sick today, but tomorrow you might get sick.
Right.
Yeah.
You better not get sick in
limits
Bobby's
very
group, or they're gonna cut your soup ration.
Right. Well,
Right.
But this is an important point.
Get sick in Bobby's group, and you're giving less soup. No soup for you. Like the like the Seinfeld soup Nazi. No soup for you.
Look at Data. Somebody bought him a jump to conclusions, Matt.
Ah,
Matt,
Get
you
it?
jump to conclusions.
you get it?
No, man, you become you will learn codependence, and you will learn what your limits are. You will learn what you can and can't do. You will strive to be better at the things you do. You will strive to be better at the things you can't do. But at the end of the day, nobody can do everything.
Yeah.
And in a system of pure free market capitalism, everybody ends up becoming dependent on somebody else for something, because you can't be a cobbler and a plumber and an electrician and a farmer and a soldier and the constable and the shopkeep and the latrine poop burning guy. Everyone has to have their part. But again, at this stage of the game, when you're in that inner circle, if you haven't figured this shit out by then, you're in trouble.
Yeah, I have no problem following. I think in fact, I would go so far as to say you can't lead if you can't follow.
Correct. Oh, that's absolutely true.
No way.
It's absolutely true.
You know,
I thrive very well in the middle management
Mhm.
positions. I like to work for somebody, but I like to have things that I'm in charge of.
yeah. Yeah. So we, Bobby, I think kind of what we're all getting at is I think there's kind of a line that you got to really kind of balance between managing freedom, right, and then managing community.
Sure.
Because it's like you talked about, there has to be some kind of structure, right? There has to be somebody has to decide something at some point,
Right. Yeah.
But yet also allowing for sovereignty and freedom and all of those things. That's an incredible balance.
It is very difficult to
It
achieve.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, no one wants to get voted off their own island either.
Right. Right.
I laid all this effort out. I laid out a fortune,
Yep.
to have this property, this equipment, all of this infrastructure. And I do not want to get voted off my own island because, some people come into the group that say, hey, we need this more than you do, and we don't like you anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. Or we outnumber you.
Yeah.
And
That's
we
the reason
outnumber
we're
you and
preppers
outvote
in
you.
the first place.
Yeah.
Right.
You either end up with a Lord of the Flies or an Animal Farm or a, Atlas Shrugged
Right.
scenario.
Yeah. Talk about scary, huh?
Very
super scary. Well, that's why I kind of think the whole, communal council process probably won't work very well post an event. Because that's exactly kind of what we're talking about a little bit, that because I'm in the same boat. Pitch, I agree with everything you just said. I have spent an absolute fortune, putting infrastructure in and doing the things that I do and all of those things. It's funny, we've had some conversations about, I had somebody who I respect a ton, and he didn't know what he said, but totally respect him a whole bunch. And he said to me, hey, Tag, if I was going to pull a camper up here, where would I tie into your septic? Dude, it's a big statement. Right. This is a gigantic statement. You know, in my world, and I had to tell him, I said, Bud, you know, when I designed this septic, I had to go to the county, right? The only permits really I have to have out here, but they designed it around this number of bathrooms with this number of people. If I allow every single person in this type of event to come in and plug into a septic, none of us are going to have one. The system won't handle it. No different than a solar system. The exact same thing. And so, you know, this is something.
If you let him park his camper and let it drain down the hill, no one has any fresh water out of your pond either.
That's right. That's absolutely right. You know, so I think managing through that is a super big challenge. You know, I've encouraged people who have said, or the plans have been, hey, you know, we'll hook up if, you know, something ever happens or whatever it is. You know, get some infrastructure in. You know, don't rely on me to do it for you. You know, you're gonna be in big old trouble. You know, and then I worry. Okay, so, you know, somebody shows up, they're living out in a tent. I'm living in a 4,000 square foot home with air conditioning in every single room, heat in every single room, right? Big infrastructure. You know, what kind of problems does that create? And I think, Bobby, to your point, you know, you say that we're at this point now where you should know all of this already, right? And although I agree,
at least a good portion of it.
Right. I agree with that when what you're talking about is the inner core, what, you know, we guys that train together, work together, we buy together, we do all of these things together, but there's a lot of people who would be anticipated to be around who've done none of this. And in fact, those people will outnumber the inner core when it's all said and done.
Yes.
Right. The have-nots for sure. Yeah.
You're talking about like grandma, your brother,
whoever, right?
Uncle Skip, whatever,
right.
yeah,
whatever it is. You know, even you know,
your children and his wife or something like that.
Absolutely right. And you're going to get outnumbered super quick. I think that's super dangerous.
Well, honestly, I mean, if we're going to get down to brass tacks, that's why you have high capacity magazines. Either you have faith in the equipment you're putting back or you don't.
Right.
Well, and I hate to be so dark about it, but I mean, you are not obligated, as if you have a group and a property, you're not obligated to take in every waif and wayfarer who comes through who didn't plan.
I think you asterisk what you said there, Bobby, with you have faith in the people that you collect and surround yourself with as well.
Yes.
Trust.
Absolutely. That's the point of a group. The point of a group isn't to, well, we all think Yellowstone's going to erupt and we all like guns. Yeah. That's the outer circle, man. That's the conversation in the outer circle. By the time you get to this little one, you should be at a lot more of an intimate level than that.
Yep. You have faith that the people that are around you are going to do what they're supposed to do. Yeah, that everyone's going to do their part.
And sure, there's no crystal ball. And the minute Yellowstone erupts and the world becomes a drastically different place, of course, there's a chaos theory involved where there are certain things you just can't account for. But my God, we've been prepping for 20 years, most of us. If we haven't at least thought about these scenarios at some point, even just sitting around the fire playing a game of Conflicted, then we're doing something wrong. We shouldn't be the voices up here speaking if we haven't had these conversations and thought about these things. We should be the ones listening to someone else's video.
Yeah. Right. I agree with that. So next topic we have on our list today is communication. How does a group communicate? Data, start with you.
Oh man, you know, there's been a lot of debates about this one. This one's a pretty heated one, but it's, again, I don't think it has to be complicated or any more complicated than anyone likes to make these kind of things. I think it's simple. You know, you have an information dissemination center. That's pretty much what it boils down to. I think the easiest thing. You have a POC that's their job. You know, talking about in a voluntary, involuntary world. If your job is information dissemination, it's what you do, you know, and some of us are far better at it in communicating than others. Yeah, I'm guilty. I suck at communicating. Please don't make me the communications guy, because we will all be late for the next meeting if it's my responsibility to set that up, you know, so.
And some of us will be late if it's not your responsibility.
So that's my point. So don't put that burden on my shoulders. But yeah, so you know, I think a singular point of communication, you know, information dissemination, if that's what you're talking about. But then further and beyond that, I guess internally communicating within your group, you have SOPs for that. You have protocol for that, and that's going to be, again, dependent upon your core group, what your agenda is, what your goals are.
So SOP is referring to more governance.
And I was always a fan of it. Remember, I like order. I like structure.
I don't know. Is the owner's manual to your TV remote governance?
If it
That's what an SOP is. It's a standard operating procedure of how you use certain equipment. That's not governance.
It's just a general guideline. This is not exactly how I'm going to do it. But again, I'm going to take a piece from this and make it my algorithm.
Yeah.
This is just a general guideline.
Yeah.
So if it's just a general guideline,
guideline.
Okay, so if it's just a general guideline, then you don't have to follow it.
It's a suggested guideline. That's right.
Okay, so it's suggested.
Follow it.
Yeah, you're getting into spirit of the law versus letter of the law.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very much a spirit of the law kind of guy. And Tag, you being former Army, you know this. The Army has a specific way they want you to talk on a radio. Does anybody actually talk that way? No. We come close enough not to get in trouble. It's literally that simple.
Yeah, well, but I still think this is where this gets so fascinating to me, where I could sit back and watch conversations like this forever, because you're talking about, okay, the SOP, the standard operating procedure, says that in this event this will happen, or in this event this is how things will go down, right? Okay, so that's very different than a manual that says this is how you put a battery in. And so either because either people follow it or they don't.
But if your SOP says you're supposed to do your fire checks on the hour every hour, but someone checks it at 10:02, did they actually violate the SOP because they were 2 minutes late? No. Or did they follow the intent?
Okay, they followed the intent. Look for intent. So did they follow the intent at 10:15 and 10:30 and 10:45 and 11 o'clock?
Well, sure, no. That's where your folks are going to start getting into their back and forth of finalizing it. But I mean,
you keep that shit up, Tag, and you're going to lose food privileges at the next soup line.
Right. But I mean, you get the point, right? There's such a thing as there's the spirit of the law and there's the letter of the law. The idea is you check your fire watches every hour on the hour. The reason they use on the hour every hour is because it's an idiot-proof way to look at a clock and use that tool to govern when you do something. Right?
Yeah, but if nobody's expected to follow it to the letter of the law, it's not that convenient, because it's not an hour, it's an hour and 15 minutes, an hour and 20 minutes, it's whatever it is. Where's the line?
This is where you should trust the people you surrounded yourself with to use some common sense, right? If you're something may have happened. There's a lot of extenuating circumstances that could be into this example, but the fact still remains. If you're checking every 3 hours, you're not following the intent of the rule. If you're checking every hour-ish and you're 5 minutes off, 3 minutes off, you're following the intent. The idea is to make things regular, not to make things regimented. There's a difference.
I like how you said that. And I think that was said really, really well. So communications, back to it, because I could go, oh my goodness. Hitch, what do you think about communications amongst a group?
What are you thinking about communications like right now? We're talking about communications during austere times. We're talking about communications.
I think it's about how does a group stay in touch? How does a group continue to be a group? It's really how I take it.
So in Bobby's reference, he'd mentioned that they have routine meetings and times where they get together, something like that's what we're talking about.
Yep.
Well, so in current times, there's various ways that we can communicate that are really, really super easy. I mean, text messaging, phone calls, because some of us are going to be spread out across parts unknown. And, so it's easier to use the current means and methods. There's certain things that you're not going to want to talk about over telephones and text messages and emails. I mean, there's ways to do it secure. Maybe I question just about any of that security once it leaves your place and goes to a different server, because it's no longer in your possession. And even if it's encrypted, as long as someone has it, it's just a matter of time and pressure to break encryption. So there's certain things I wouldn't talk about in open channels, and so they're going to involve some face-to-face meetings. I mean, I think anybody that's done this for any amount of time that has any level of access to sensitive information has had those meetings where the cell phones go in the microwave and you close the door so that you've created a little box of no cell service or no signal in or out, and you say, hey, here's this thing that I heard about today from someone that works someplace, and we're not supposed to talk about it, but I need to let you, the four of us need to know about it.
So inside the inner circle, should there be a requirement that people get together?
A requirement to get together in person?
Yeah, should there be a requirement that we're meeting this so often or this place, or we're doing these activities, or we're training together, or whatever it is? Should there be a requirement that the group gets together?
So remember I talked about the tribes, right?
Mhm.
And so if you have this group of people in the tribe and they appoint their people to go and get together, that would serve that purpose, right? Because then these guys can go back and disseminate it to these guys. Make sense?
So there should be a requirement?
I think that at time to time that it would behoove everybody to get together, but a requirement then in turn would mean that if you don't do it, you're out, right? And
I don't know what it means. I'm just curious if you guys feel, because this is just such an interesting balance between freedom and community, right?
sure.
Go ahead, Bobby.
Yes. The answer is yes.
Okay.
It's a group or it's not.
Mhm.
Okay. But the group can make that determination together, right? Like, for example, my group for the first 10 years, we met every single month.
Mhm.
And then for a while, everyone got a little burnt out because we were doing it so much. And so we went to once every 6 months. And now we're back to once every 2 months.
Mhm.
As long as you're achieving the common goals
Mhm.
that your group agrees are the common goals, and you meet when the group agrees it should meet.
Mhm.
It doesn't have to be like every other or every quarter. It can be whatever you all decide. But I mean, and that's up to the group. Every group's going to be different on
Of
how
course.
they do it.
Of course.
But I mean, sure, if you have a group, there should, in my mind anyway, be some sort of responsibility to that group. And if you're going to voluntarily place yourself into a group, then yeah, there is an expectation that you act as a group, at least sometimes.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
if you're sick and can't make it, you're sick and can't make it. But I mean, but yeah.
But Bobby, I know you know this about me, but I'm not anti-rules at all. I think there should be a governing
Oh, I
set
know.
of basic
Sure.
principles, but I just think it's really, really important to flush out the
Mhm.
issue of, okay, here's another rule. Wait, I don't want any rules. And as we go through this, there's going to be 8 of them that, well, those are all real, I just think it's important to talk about this because this is the point where everyone's going to get hung up. And this is where groups are going to get torn apart, is right here.
Yep.
So I just think it's important to
Well,
flush it out. Data, do you think there should be mandatory meetings? Should people be made to get together?
Do I think there should be mandatory meetings where people are made to get together? I think that if you're a part of a group, again, this is going back to those core tenets. I mean, I think we're past this point at this point in the conversation. It shouldn't, I don't think it should have to be mandatory at this point. It should be, at this point, I'm hanging out with you anyway because we're drinking beer and finishing a project in the garage. Or you're helping me with a project downstairs, or we're killing chickens this weekend, or we're processing pigs, or we're going to go pick up this load of whatever, and you need a ride or die to watch your back and ride shotgun. I think that's where you're at this point. So if you're having this conversation with people in your group, fine, I think. But if you're having to have this conversation in your head about people in your group, maybe not. Maybe you're not fine.
So allow me to interpret that real quick. Yep, okay, 1 second. So what you're saying is there should be no set rule that you're getting together, but if people aren't getting together, then we should be rethinking whether or not they're involved in this group.
Not necessarily. I'm thinking in how you've structured yourself in the things that you're participating in. Especially in terms of your group. I think that it should be it should be a voluntary option that we're doing chickens this weekend. And again, and going all the way back to the beginning of our conversation in the video series, we talked about clues and conclusions, and rather than trying to draw a conclusion to that, I mean, you just chalk some of these things into the conclusion category of, okay, well, Data has missed the last 19 chicken, processing classes. Data really doesn't like chickens. He's squeamish, or he just, but he's been to every communications class, or he's been to every camp out, or he's been to every, so, I mean, that's what I mean by questioning that, like, what's going on, because at this point in the conversation, or this point in the relationship, you should know each other pretty well. You should know intimate details about those around you and vice versa. So
Go ahead. Go ahead. You wanted to get in there?
Yeah. So if the 4 of us were in a group, let's pretend, okay? And Bobby contacts me and he says, hey, Tag and Data and I were talking, and we're going to get together this weekend, and we're going to, practice sighting in these rifles or do some sort of special tactic but I also I want to let you know there's XYZ subject we're going to talk about. You know, I know that you're familiar with that tactic or that use, that weapon or whatever, but it really might behoove you to be there because we're going to talk about this subject and it's not something we talk about on the phone. Guess what? It's not required. I'm going to be there. Okay.
Right.
Because I don't want to get left out of this conversation and have to hear it like third party from you guys. Right. And I think that applies to most things. And like Data was saying, you know, one guy may not be really keen on slaughtering chickens or dealing with that, but he's more into communications or whatever. Cool. But if you want to get the guy that's not into slaughtering chickens there, find some reason for him to be there. Speak to the why. Didn't we talk about that like in an early convention that we had? Okay. You know, so again, speak to the why. Don't make it a requirement, make it enticing, you know?
Right.
Make it enticing. Yeah, absolutely. And again, there's always going to be, life happens, as Bobby said, and people can't make it to things. And, you know, we may have to come up with some sort of briefing to come back and say, hey, Hitch, so sorry, you know, your uncle died and you had to fly across the country to that funeral. So here's what we talked about in a nutshell, you know? Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, your core group of people are going to want to get involved, right? Mm-hmm. And I guess as I was sitting here and we're talking about, you know, current communication, actually, when I saw this on the agenda, I thought this was about communication post SHTF, you know, as far as like radios and so forth.
Yeah, well, we can certainly talk about that, but, you know, I think that my goal on it was just how does a group stay a group?
Gotcha.
You know, Bobby, do you have a different interpretation of that?
No, I get it. And I would say that if you have a group, that there's already an innate desire. And if there's a desire, you just have to, as the leadership, water that desire. It's not hard. I mean, people belong to all sorts of organizations all over the world for all sorts of reasons. And you belong to the Boy Scouts because you believe in the cause of the Boy Scouts. You belong to the Audubon Society because you believe in the Audubon Society. And you show up when you can, as often as you can, right? But no one's putting you in jail if you miss a few weeks.
I like the key thing Bobby said there. It's leadership's job to water that desire.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
My question:
you're going to be put into a position, you have to take that responsibility seriously.
To you gentlemen, I'd ask this: what is the protocol, or how do you decide in your individual groups when someone does fall to the wayside? So let's say you got a guy that was really hot and heavy, really pushing, you know, like just infrastructure, he's investing or she was investing, and they're putting things together, and then you just almost never see them, you know, at events, and they're just not that, you know, around. Maybe you're still talking to them on the phone, but they just don't seem to be as involved in this. Mm-hmm. What do you do? What do you guys do in your individual groups?
Me to go first? Well, Hitch, you know that I'm a very tolerant guy, and I try to look for the good first. I always will. I just think you're way better off doing it. So I think the first thing is I, you know, try to reach out and see if there's something going on I don't understand. You know, I'm going through a divorce. I've got, well, you know, whatever it is, you know, whatever the life events are that cause that. But I think at some point, with enough time missed, I have to start being concerned about OPSEC. I have to start becoming concerned about, okay, wait a second. I probably don't want to be talking about these level of things anymore until at least they start coming around. And then, you know, a few more months go by, there's going to come a point in time where I start planning just around it and saying that this person's not going to be here. I can't count on them. You know, I wish them the best, wish them no harm, but I would just kind of next it in my own mind and move on. Bobby?
I think that's right. Again, we're not warlords. You know, we're not kings. We're not rulers of people just because we are in a leadership position in a preparedness group. It's a voluntary thing. People come because they want to. One of the way we haven't really had to deal with this often, let's say in my particular group, but we've had a very similar circumstance. And that's kind of what led in part to the whole vestment idea is once you're vested, right? You have ownership, kind of like a timeshare, I guess. I don't know if that's a really good example, but like you could have someone who's a member of a timeshare and then they never use their week, but they paid for it. It's theirs, you know? So the caliber of people you're talking to be in this kind of an organization, there's probably layers of reasons why they were there to begin with. And again, they might not have shown up for the last year or two of training, but at the same point, if they vested themselves and all of a sudden Yellowstone erupts and they show up, it's not like their skills are any less. You know, they're still the plumber, they're still the butcher, and you might have to have a conversation with them, I guess, when they would come back, like, where have you been? But I mean, if you're not willing to reconcile and at least have that conversation, then.
But what do you do with their stuff?
I personally don't touch people's things. We all have our own lockers, and our stuff is in our lockers. The communal stuff is in a completely different section of where we do things than our personal stuff. Now, I have allowed certain people in my group to have keys to my locker, because if I don't make it, if Yellowstone erupts and 2 weeks later I'm still not there, something's probably wrong, and that stuff's just sitting there wasting space. By all means, use it. You know, I've got one locker's worth of stuff there. It ends up getting used, and then 4 months later I showed up because I was trekking in bare feet from somewhere in Colorado. Okay, I'm not going to sweat over the fact that one locker's worth of my stuff got used in austere circumstances. I have more, right? That's the whole thing of being a prepper, is you have redundancies and you don't put all your stuff in one place, let's say. But I mean, again, that should speak to the caliber of people you're with. There's not a person in my group that I don't trust with that locker. And if they have to get into it, I know my people well enough to know there's a reason they had to get into it. And I also have surrounded myself with people who very much respect personal property, private property, and personal boundaries. You know, if someone has to break into my locker to get a tourniquet because all the other tourniquets got used and their kid's bleeding out, I'm not going to fault them from grabbing a tourniquet from my wall locker, you know. But I've also surrounded myself with people that I can feel that way about.
Yeah, so let's talk about finances. So is there any place where a community will share some finances? Data?
Sharing finances or sharing resources?
Are there group finances? Does the group have its own money? Is there like fees and I don't want to use that other word, right? That's a bad word.
Use it.
Can't use it.
Yep.
Yeah, so donations internally in the group to a communal cause in terms of monetary support for common goals.
Mm-hmm.
Do I believe that should be a instituted thing? Is that what you mean?
Yes. I think you said that well, Dave, actually.
I
go to law school.
In support of what you're trying to achieve. Again, the people you've surrounded yourself with, and no, those are not law books on the shelf behind me. But the people you've surrounded yourself with, they're going to have some similar goals. They're going to have some similar algorithms. Again, they're not going to be 100% meshed with yours, and if they are, that's just creepy. So I think there probably should be a communal pot that is donated to in order to achieve common goals. Like if you're people that you hang out with, you all need a big chicken plucker, or multiple chicken pluckers because you're tired of doing 50 chickens, 100 chickens, 150 chickens at a time, and you're tired of dunking them dudes, just throwing feathers. You want 3 of those chicken plucker machines. Yeah, I think everybody should chip in and buy a chicken plucker or a dueling tree or whatever it is that you need to better strengthen your weaknesses within your group, or bolster your weaknesses, or cater, and strengthen your strengths.
Kitch, what do you think about that?
With the 2 tribes that I have here at the primary location, we don't have any funds that are going into one place. It's just, hey, there's this thing that we're thinking about getting, and the people participate at their level of means. There's one family that doesn't have a whole lot, and so their participation, what they do have is they have a lot of children, which is super important to me, because I have a few children and I'm getting older. Okay. But so their participation probably is not as much monetary. Their participation is more, donating of labor and time and that. There's another tribe here that they have more means, and if there's something that comes up and, hey, this is going to be $10,000, that person, the leader of that tribe says, where do you want me to mail the check for $5,000? And he's like, yeah, whatever, I'll help you out. We'll make that happen, because they want to have a place to lay their head when their family gets here, and they want to have these things. And so that's what's worked for me and my group, is just very, loosely like that. I own some big equipment that's expensive and, expensive to keep it up. And it's just mine because I use it every day in my agribusiness. So I just don't sweat that because it's something I needed anyway,
Mhm.
I invest a lot of money into livestock because, the ability to be able to produce more is important. But in the meantime, I'm also not stuck in the system of, okay, Bobby, I sold this cow. Here's your share of the money, and Data, here's your share of the money, and
Right.
Nagger, here's your share of the money.
Mhm.
But on the other hand, with some of the other participants, we do have specific animals that have people's names on it, or a group of people's names on it. Sure, but not like a producing cow or bull or something like that. That's part of my means of production for my day-to-day life in current times. Does that make sense? Because I have to operate this agricultural operation as a for-profit venture anyway, whether something bad happens or not.
Yeah. So, Bobby, you had talked earlier about a fee, I think is the word that you used. So you would believe more in an organized structure, correct?
Organized but bendable. Sure. Like, okay, I'll just throw out some numbers for an example. Let's say for my group, it's $10 per person per month. So my family is a family of 6. So I would owe $60 a month, okay, towards that investment period. But let's say I have a low month. It's perfectly okay to dip into my ammo supply and at the current rate do an exchange of barter that keeps things fair. And it's all above board. People understand how it is. And it's going to be different for different groups. With ours, we are a little more regimented because we all happen to be of the same opinion that, again, every decision is economic. And whether we like it or not, money at the end of the day has ended up being historically the most common baseline used to determine that. Now, as preppers and homesteaders and survivalists and whatever you want to call us, we also see barter and trade as absolutely equal to a dollar bill, right? In some cases, maybe even more. So as long as it's above board and everybody agrees, you can make that work any way you want to. It doesn't have to be rigid, but I do believe very much in the idea of ownership. And everybody who equally has ownership in something is probably going to be, at least in some cases, equally vested in how it works.
Yeah, ownership is a huge part. That's what we were talking about, sovereignty. And how, I've seen it tear apart. I can't even tell you. I mean, numerous groups, because they got into a spot where, wait a second, my house, my rules, or
right.
The other side, the other people couldn't trust because it wasn't theirs, kind of thing. So I've always been a big believer in sovereignty. And I told you guys this many, many times, I've built a lot of businesses in my life. I've built a lot of things, but my ultimate goal is to build a town.
Yeah,
it is. That's absolutely
awesome.
Someday, sometime, someplace. So real quick, let's talk about bylaws. So, Bobby, we started with you, so let's just start there. Does your group run by a particular set of bylaws? Does it matter?
A little bit, yeah. And it's more of a constitution, I guess you could call it. When we came together, we actually signed a charter together as the initial founding members. And with one exception, they're all still here. Like I said, we've been around 17 years. So, and part of the reason I think we are still around is because we have learned to adapt everything from the fees to the system to the bylaws over time to accommodate, because people do change. Even me, as a founding member of this thing, I've changed in my opinions on how things work, right? We all grow, we all change. But yeah, we have a system of bylaws, and it's a very small list, it's probably a lot smaller than people would think it is. It's typed out in a few pages, right? It's just basic. And most of it has to do with how communal funds are spent. That's what the bylaws are there to do, is to protect your investment. It is there to protect the fact that if you're giving freely of your money to a group of people, that you should know what that money is being used for. And so most of our rules revolve around the communal pot of money from the fees that you pay to be a member of this particular group. But past that, we very much are in the camp of you live your life. And we're not going to tell you that you have to wear the color blue on Tuesdays. And we're not going to tell you that you can only eat oatmeals on Wednesdays, right? I mean, It's not like that. It's more again, management than it is, you know, rules. I mean, yeah, they're rules, sure, but it's more about management of communal goods than it is dictating how you live your life and how you do things while you're at the group.
So would you refer to that as a social contract, Bobby?
Yeah, I absolutely would. It's a voluntary social contract where people
are your
actually were
children
around.
signers of the social contract? Are they bound by that social contract as they grow older?
Yeah, but we're also able to change it.
But your children all signed it?
What's that?
Your children signed it?
When they become a member, yes.
Okay.
They don't. We have 3 different levels of membership. So your child at 5 years old is not a member of the group. They're what's called an inactive member. They're being paid for, obviously, because as parents are not leaving them behind. But once they get to be a certain age, and that age is different for everybody, is when the parents and the child believe that they are at the point where they can fully, then we say, this is what we do. Are you in agreement with this? And they'll ask their questions. And by and large, they're raised by us. They're pretty similar in mindset. And then they get to sign their John Hancock to it.
So then as their parent, you're going to pay their taxes until they're an adult. And then as an adult, they can choose to sign a social contract and pay the taxes themselves.
Yes. If you want to use the word tax, sure.
Okay.
Go ahead,
I
David.
call it a fee.
It's at that point then you allow your kids though to decide for themselves though of their own free will.
Yes. We have had several children, and like I said, we've been around for 17 years. Most of us have teenage kids or kids in their 20s. A few of them just don't participate anymore.
Yeah.
But as their parent, I've paved their way. So Yellowstone erupts 6 months from now. If they're like, oh God, my parents were right, and they show up, they're vested. They're still welcome.
That's where I was going with that. Even if your kids don't pay, they know where the place is, and you're not going to leave them behind. You're not going to know. But for 3 months, 6 months, 3 years, they didn't participate, and you didn't participate on their behalf because they were adults. But now everyone else is going to be diminished because,
that creates a free rider, right? They become free riders.
Luckily, we started at a young enough age, as I've started in my early 20s, mid 20s on this. So, I mean, luckily that hasn't been an issue, but I could absolutely see how it could be if you joined a group and your kid was already 16 and they only got paid for 2 years, right? It's definitely an issue. We're just lucky enough where, because of the nature of what my group is, we haven't had to deal with that. And it would be a tough thing to deal with.
Yeah. So Hitch, what do you think about bylaws?
I don't really have any.
You found any need for any?
Just depend. I guess it depends on how much you want to organize your group. I mean, at the end of the day, there is nobody in my group that if they called me in the middle of the night and they said, Hitch, I need help right now. How quickly can you get here? I'm gonna, get there right away. People that I interact with at that level, I've got a lot of trust. I got a lot of trust and a lot of tolerance, So, and we're not talking about a huge number of people here. We're not talking about 100 people. We're talking about a small number of people, which might become 50 people, right? In a grid down situation, because their 22-year-old kid and their 28-year-old kid and their family and their kids, are going to show up, and someone might bring a girlfriend or an ex-girlfriend or an ex-wife and their kids. That's the stuff you got planned for, in my opinion. And so are there bylaws related to that at some level? There's some real simple ones. If you're planning on being here, you better have invested up front. 2, if you got extra miles you're bringing, you better be investing for those extra miles right now today, because I can only invest so much. I can't count on that. So if you want to call those bylaws, that's stuff that I've just flat out told people.
Yeah. So does that mean that
prepare for them?
That a high school buddy that you've known forever and ever has contributed nothing, shows up at the gate, you're sending them away?
That's going to be something that at a tribal level, we're going to decide, does this person's worth have, their skill level or their knowledge or whatever it is they showed up with? Does it mean something to us? Is it something that we can risk the welfare of the rest of the group to let them in? Or, hey, buddy, I'm sorry, we don't have enough.
Yeah. So Data, what do you think about bylaws?
Real quick, can I give a shout out to John Wallace and SOE for hooking me up with this really badass shirt. I'm not participating in your new normal.
That guy was awesome, man.
By the way, I'm talking to you, John. So bylaws, you know, I again, going back to the beginning of this, I think there was kind of a boomerang question that kind of skirted around bylaws a little bit. And you're asking some of those things about what people thought, you know, about governance. And I think bylaws are a part of that governance. If you have some type of governance established, then you obviously have, you can replace the word with whatever you want.
Mhm.
Voluntary, involuntary, bylaw, hard rule, fast rule, constitution, call it whatever you want. I mean, you can sugarcoat and you know, politicize the words all you want, but at the end of the day, those are rules, you know, or agreed upon tolerances are whatever they are, what they are. I won't encroach upon your supplies, you won't encroach upon mine. I won't touch your old lady's butt, you won't touch mine, unless we're into that. So I'm just saying, there has to be some sort of bylaws, I think, in place. You have to have some sort of established rule of law. And again, I'm not a, you guys know me, I'm not a statist. I'm not a, you know, socialist either. I'm somewhere in the middle. But I think you have to have some kind of, not necessarily set in stone, but at least loosely agreed upon, what's the word we like to use here? Confederacy of things that we agree to.
Right. Yeah, I think my opinion on this is that the people that I hang out with, most people that I hang out with constantly, they really don't have a lot of need for it. We're all pretty like-minded. We're all pretty, you know, and those kind of things. But I think you really have to play for where the puck's going to be.
Yes.
I think if you just do it around, hey, I've got these 8 friends and we're really, really close. First of all, people change. That's the first thing.
Mhm.
The second thing is that what governs the masses when that time comes. And I think it has to be just, and I don't think it has to be complicated at all. For example, personal property.
Yep.
Right. Personal property is such a huge deal. What you own is what you own. I'm not going to take it. I'm not going to attempt to take it. I'm not going to advocate to taking it. I'm just not. And, you know, so just, I think there has to be some, what guides the group? What's the common purpose of the group? So everyone's pointed in the same direction. I think a serious group really needs to get to a point where those things exist.
Yes.
I don't see how you.
Yeah, you're saying you believe in bylaws.
I absolutely believe in bylaws.
Yes, you're saying that you believe in structure and governance.
I believe in some limited structured governance. Yes, not so much for today, because again, today, you know, we all do our thing in this, but when that moment comes, how you deal with some super important topics, again, like personal property is a big one. Sovereignty is a big one. These are the things that are going to tear you apart. And if you can't sit down and agree that, hey, and whether you take one side, which is when the shit hits the fan, everything is gathered for the community. That's one side of the argument. The other side of the argument is, no, personal property is personal property. And if you go hungry, you go hungry.
Sure.
Right. I don't think it matters. Well, and I do think it matters, but what you do, isn't all that important to me. Just to say that I do believe that you've got to have some guiding principles to get you along. This is why Christianity, you know, when you talked about the church earlier, Bobby, if everybody gets together and they're all Baptists and they all believe, I mean, they're going to get along fairly good because they're guided by a certain set of principles.
Right.
If you get a group together that's got a Muslim, a Buddhist, a Hindu, a Christian, you got to have some kind of agreement on how particular problems are going to be dealt with. Yeah, I think you have to. I don't see how you get around it any other way.
Well, think about what you say to me. When you gave me advice one time on business and you said, Bobby, we're not agreeing on this right now because of you and me. We're agreeing on this because of the guy who comes after you.
That's right.
I mean, and like you said, you want to start a town, right? Well, if you want to attract the dentist and you want to attract the nuclear physicist and you want to attract people to your society, you have to have something to attract them with. And having certain boundaries and guidelines in place is how you do that. There's never been a society that's been successful where it was just a free-for-all and people to shit in the streets. You know what I mean? Those societies collapse very, very quickly.
Bro, San Francisco is alive and well.
It's alive and well and full of shit. You know, are you moving there? Are you being attracted to move to San Francisco because of all the bums shitting in the street? I'm not.
You got a pretty smile.
Free
But
for days.
Are people being attracted to random county USA and Kansas where they have certain ideologies that kind of people tend to agree on, right?
Yeah.
Think about that. If you don't want the warlords just collecting all the good people and forcing them into servitude, give us a better option.
Right.
Bobby, what worked for the Brehons?
The Brehons were amazing. They were one of two actual societies in history that were, for all intents and purposes, libertarian anarchists. They had kings and they had militaries, but they were tiny. The kings had virtually a very limited amount of power. Most of it was actually religious. The Brehon society lasted for 1,000 years. They hardly ever went to war. And when they did, it lasted for a day because there was no way for them to centrally collect taxes to build these mega armies with. So, I mean, I'm glad you brought that up, actually. The Brehons, and then there was a collective of 7 tribes of Native Americans up by the Great Lakes. They lasted for like 800 years, and they were completely decentralized.
The Iroquois Confederacy.
Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. Completely decentralized, but they still had their rules. They still had their traditions. You were taught those traditions as children. You had a culture, right? You had these things in place, but at any time you could walk away. Sovernty was very much a part of the Brehon society, and it was very much a part of the Native Confederacy you were just talking about. It can work. And those societies the Greeks didn't last that long, but the Greek Empire was 400 years? The Brehons, 1,000 years. I mean, just saying.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of a bunch of rules, but I do think you have to maintain some kind of balance, or you'll get,
Sure.
back to Hitch's point of that, the 85-15 rule. If you don't have some kind of governance, that 85 will overrun. And
absolutely. And then you get mob rule.
Your own island at some point, yes.
Right, it'll be a democracy.
Yes,
that's
will,
dangerous.
You will be told at some point that some pigs are worth more than other pigs, or some pigs eat more than other pigs.
Yeah, all pigs are equal, but some are more equal than others.
Yep.
Yeah,
rules for me, but are thee for not for me?
Yeah. Yeah. So we talked about personal property a little bit, and I'm pretty sure I know where everyone's going to stand on this, but let's just talk about personal property. How does personal property, how is it valued inside of a group like this, Bobby?
Well, to get into my inner group, you've already got to have some. I mean, I'm not going to necessarily go out and recruit somebody who doesn't own a basic rifle, or who doesn't have some food or a bug out bag, right? Or I'm using cliche things, but I mean,
let me ask the question differently. So let's say one of your group members shows up with a truckload of rice and beans and blah 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 blah. Is that their property?
Yeah.
And they're not obligated in any form, manner to share with the group?
No.
Okay.
If you have a group that's worth their salt, you already would have taken in preparations to make sure you don't need that other guy's stuff.
Yeah. 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 I agree with that, but I think the personal property question is super important. Data, what do you think?
That's an easy one, bro. Your sword is your sword and your cloak is your cloak. But if you are hungry, I will feed you. And if I am hungry, I would hope that you would feed me. And if we don't know each other better than that, then shame on me.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I think that Data, with all due respect, that's super easy to say. And I think and I'm not specifically talking to you, but when somebody is hungry and their kids are hungry, and through that other door there is food, there will be a problem.
Of course. And again, if I won't feed you and you won't feed me, then shame on us.
Right. We did it wrong. Yep.
We did it wrong. Right.
Hitch, you got any comment?
This conversation at this point. In fact, we're like, well, damn, this is the last bowl of beans, bro.
Everybody gets 3 beans.
You know what? I'm on patrol again. Damn it.
We all fart equally.
Hitch, you got any comments on personal property?
Yeah, sure, certainly. So, Tag, let's say that you show up here and you bring what personal property you could bring, given whatever circumstances. And one of the things that you don't have is feminine hygiene products. Okay. You got enough to last your wife and your daughter for 3 months.
Okay.
But Bobby and Data and myself are here, and we've got, years supply for all of the women that are here.
I was just
So
preparing for the ladies' needs after the apocalypse.
and so should we share, should we pool our stocks together so for the betterment of you and what you bring, or should we not share that with you, and your wife and your daughter have to make other choices, other means?
Yeah, so that's actually an easy answer, and it's, I don't think it's the right question, but I think it's an easy answer. The answer is yes, you should pool it. The question I have is, should you be made to pool?
Sure.
Because we all have individual choice, right? And I would not do everything I could to make sure someone didn't go hungry. The question, though, I think lies in, should it be mandated inside the group that that's what happens?
So truth be told, I will share a tampon with any one of you guys. I will.
Why do you do stuff like that? Then I got to edit it out.
but the question is, no,
leave that in.
No, listen. Here's the point. The point is, will I take a spoonful of beans out of my kid's mouth and put it in your kid's mouth?
Right.
I'll give you a tampon out of my supply.
Right.
But will I take food out of my kid's mouth and put it in yours?
Right.
Will I take it out of my mouth and put it in yours?
Right.
So what about freedom seeds? Let's say that I show up with all the freedom seeds that I own is 500. And between you guys, you've got 50,000.
Yep.
So, but 500 freedom seeds is all I can afford, or all I can manage to squirrel away and bring.
Yep.
At some point, there might come a day where my freedom seeds are just as important as those beans. Right.
Yep.
And I've only got a very tiny amount.
Yep.
So
this is where the rule of survival comes in. But to Tag's point, no, there should never be a rule that says you have to.
Yeah,
if I'm already in this little tiny circle with you, it's because you're the kind of person I'm going to give you some freedom seeds.
Yeah, that's how you find yourself in a dictatorship right there.
Yes, well, okay, but again, now we're talking about, Bobby, playing where the puck's going to be. Right? I 100% agree with you. When you're talking about the 5 dudes you hang out with, the 12 people, the 8 family members, whatever it is, but each of them have a mom and a dad and a sister and a brother. Each of them have whatever, right? And I have a hard time believing that somebody's going to turn their mom away at a fence.
No.
Okay.
Why would you? I'm not saying turn them away.
Okay. But
I'm just saying that you should surround yourself with the kind of people who would be willing to help voluntarily.
Pretty quick, you'll be outnumbered.
It's like, again, that's why I have high capacity magazines.
Right.
I mean,
well, and people
around get down to brass tacks. That's what it boils down to.
You guys know me. If we're together, we're doing this thing. I'll bleed for you, and I'll make others bleed for you. And that's the way it ought to be in this situation. You shouldn't have to worry about whether or not someone's going to come for your beans, because I'm watching your back. You're watching my back.
I agree with everything you said. I agree with everything you said, but I think that the dangerous part of all of this is that all that theory works great when you're talking about the 5 or 6 that hang out every time, they train every time, they've been invested in this. Bobby, you guys have been doing it for 17 years. Everybody knows each other. You've got this long-term relationship, but now there's all these outliers that come in. And I think it's those outliers that makes this situation so rough.
Well, to be fair,
you look at the feudalism situation, and the feudalism, scenario. You're going to have the fiefdom. You'll have all the farm workers and the wood splitters living at the edge of the fiefdom. While the king and the dukes and the whoever, the knights of the round table, the defenders of the land, they tend to live in the central hub of the kingdom.
So you gave Tag freedom seeds because Tag was out of freedom seeds, and now Billy, who's part of that outer circle, who by the way outnumber you, doesn't have any and wants you to give some because it's only fair because you gave some to Tag.
No, not fair. It's because that's his job, is to defend the kingdom. I'm a wood splitter. My job is to keep the fire going and split wood. His job is to walk patrols and fight the wolves. Damn right, I'm going to give him some of my freedom seeds. Keep me safe, brother. Make sure I can do my job.
Yeah, I think
I'll make sure you can do yours.
I think that's my point. Still the same. You're outnumbered. And it just that gets sketchy pretty quick, in my opinion.
You're always going to be outnumbered, though.
Yeah. I mean, that's the baseline, man. Every decision, though, is an economic decision. How you choose to use your resources. I mean, look, I don't think anybody here is like that uber selfish guy who's going to make sure he eats while the rest of his society dies around him. You know, you have to have a certain baseline philosophy to do what we do. And you have to have a very specific baseline philosophy to do what we do morally. And if you're going to be one of the moral ones, one of the good ones who builds a town and not not a dictatorship, I mean, I would hope to God you would have taken some of this already into consideration, right?
Oh, for sure.
I mean, we're not operating in a world where you come together because Yellowstone erupts and now your 25 people who are in your group and their family is there and you're existing for a few weeks, and then random Joe just shows up and expects you to give him stuff. I mean, that's kind of an unrealistic scenario. I don't think that's going to actually happen. I think that's prepper porn. That's fear porn. I don't think that happens very often.
You don't think that every member's got a mom and a dad and a sister and a brother and they're all going to end up there?
Sure, but why aren't you already planning for them?
Why aren't you already setting up a refugee center?
Okay, now there's a really, really, really good point. How many people are actually doing that? How many people have the means to actually do that?
Everyone in my group plans for our family members, including the ones we don't like.
Mm-hmm.
We take that responsibility on ourselves, and we do it because we choose to, not because it's a rule.
Mm-hmm.
And we actually plan. My group has contingencies and plans for if random people show up. We already know how we're going to handle it, provided that things, of course, go a certain way. I mean, you can't, we're going to run the risk of becoming Democrats here in a minute and try to legislate everything into safety. You're not going to do that. You're not going to find a way to what if every scenario to the point where you can make a safe choice. Mm-hmm. Some of these things, when they happen, are going to be very dangerous. Mm-hmm. But that's why you own the things you own. That's why you have the beliefs you do. So when the danger arises, you are at least prepared to meet it.
That's why you surround yourself with the people you surround yourself with.
Correct.
I still think this goes
a
back
lot of
to
this should be
something-
assumed in that inner circle.
Go ahead, Hitch.
I still think this goes back to something that I brought up earlier. You need to have some property at your bug out location. So again, if the four of us, we're all going to bug out at the same place, and let's just say that it's Data's farm, and then the other three of us need to make sure that we store some personal property at Data's farm, because odds are, in austere times, we may be hoofing it there by the power of our own feet or a bicycle at best, and whatever we could carry on our back that didn't get pilfered from some picket line somewhere that we had to cross to get here. Okay, I just think a lot of people hold the illusion that they're going to show up at a bug out location with a four-wheel drive dually truck with a camper shell on a fifth wheel trailer or whatever. They're going to have all this stuff, and I just don't think that's very realistic. I think the reality is you're going to end up at your bug out location with what you were lucky to get there on your back and your life.
I agree with that.
And then you need to have a plan for that personal property, as Bobby pointed out earlier, that, hey, if I'm not here within this many months, you may have to start using my stuff if necessity dictates, right? But if Bobby shows up in 6 months, let's say it's 4 months, and in 6 months Bobby shows up and he's, naked and afraid, we're going to at least, clothe him with what we got and share what we have left with him. But hey, sorry, Bobby, my kid had to wear your pants, and, we ate your sunflower seeds and, whatever else,
Right.
But hey, we're all still here. And I think if people are not planning under that means and have some sort of bylaws for how to handle that personal property, something that people have agreed to, because at the end of the day, there's not many courts to take a contract to, but contracts can help people remember what they agreed to, right? So you talked about the social contract earlier, Bobby. This is the same thing, you got your locker, or you've got your investment into the company stores, that's X percentage of the stores, which covers you and your brother and your sister and your son and your grandchildren and your mom and your dad and your uncle. Okay. And if you have more people than that show up, your percentage might have to get divvied out further, but we're all good guys. We're going to have to try to figure it out, but we have the best laid plan.
Correct.
Right. We plan for the worst, hope for the best.
Right.
Yeah,
Your plan should not stop short of just 6 weeks for yourself. You should have a much more robust plan at that point.
Right.
What were you saying, Hitch?
I'm going to stress that you have to have property at your bug out location. If it's not yours that you live at, you have to have property there and a system, for keeping it organized, protected, accounted for.
Sounds like one of Hitch's bylaws.
Yeah. Right. Well, guys, I can't tell you how many nights I think about things like, This actually worries me, you know, that I've spent all this time, energy, and resources to get my family in a safe place, and they're safe. I mean, I've done everything I can do, you know, to have people that I care about, you know, my brother, for example, you know, and I'll just pick on him, who believes that if anything ever goes bad, he'll just go kill a deer. That's it. That's the end of this. That's, you know, right. That's the end of his preparations right there. And then now I'm having to divide my resources between more than one family, you know, and risk not getting, you know, my family far enough along or through it all. And, you know, trying to mitigate that. And I've told him many, many times, why don't you just store some stuff? You know, we'll put a shipping container out here or whatever, but I don't need all that. You know, you guys know what I'm talking about, right?
Of course.
And I'm not turning my brother away.
I'm just going to drive to the lake, pitch a tent.
Right. That guy. Right. That.
Along with everybody else.
Right.
I've had these conversations. We've had these conversations with my brother, and just like what we talked about earlier, am I willing to take a spoonful of beans out of my kid's mouth, my wife's mouth, and put it in my brother's mouth? Probably not. You know, if my brother shows up after, you know, the last 20 years of me being the ant that every summer I worked to fill the anthill while he was off playing in the creek and swinging in the trees, if he shows up to my gate, he's a stranger like everybody else. We just happen to share the same DNA.
And I think this speaks to something, guys. Like, just recently, I was in a meeting with a broker of goods that's highly desirable right now. I guess I could say, you know, metals. Okay. And this person has known me a while, and we were having a discussion, and they brought it up to me about, you know, if things ever got really bad, you've got kind of a large farm there. What if I was to this and that, and maybe, and I show up with a basket of these goods that are highly desirable. And it's like, man, you know, I mean, the stuff that person can show up with is not something I can eat, right? But living to the other side of an austere time, the stuff that person shows up with could be, you know, could be pretty valuable. It could put me and my people way ahead of all the others. So I don't know, you got to make case by case decisions, but I have so many people that know what I do, know who I am, that commonly say, well, gosh, you know, I'll show up there, I'll go there. And I've gotten very blunt. I've just gotten very, very blunt, because the number of people that say that has tripled, has not doubled, but tripled. And with what's going on in society right now. And I just bluntly say to them, if you are truly, truly interested, and I get right in there and I look in their face, if you're really interested, invest now. Because if you don't believe that that's a possibility to the point that you're going to invest now, we're not going to have this conversation later of, hey, you're going to show up at my door. I will turn you away. I have no problem. And I do have the means and the security and the capability. And you know it. That's why you want to come here. And I will turn you away. That's that. And I've had a few say, well, what would it take to invest? I tell them $25,000 or time or assets or effort. You know, you're going to have to come up with something, and you're going to have to get started now, because guess what? As the little clock in my background that you guys have seen in some of these series shows, you know, it's 5 minutes to midnight. Okay. Or 3 minutes to midnight, whatever I have it set at. But the point is all the other people I'm involved with have put years into this. If you're going to play catch up, you're going to have to come hard. You're going to have to invest hard. Look at it like the stock market's crashing and I'm pulling my money out of here and I'm putting it over here. Okay, well, you're pulling your resources out of whatever it was. Maybe you're not going to take any vacations this year. You're going to take all that money and all that time and bring your family out here and you're going to work, and invest.
Yeah.
Hitch, did I just hear you say that every decision in life is an economic decision?
Absolutely.
Yeah, Bobby, I'm surprised. Why have you not showed up on one of these videos with that on a t-shirt? It's like your thing.
86 is having Spags Unfiltered t-shirts created, and they will be available soon.
Spags Unfiltered.
And that is one of them. That is one of them.
Yeah. To caveat that point, Tag, blood doesn't necessarily constitute family, and family doesn't necessarily constitute blood. You know, in that regard, and in that light, I wouldn't necessarily turn my brother away. That's not what I was saying earlier. And what I was trying to say to clarify that is that I would treat him no different than the stranger that pled his case for why he should stay, and why I should further dilute my families. And by family, I don't just mean brothers or sisters or moms and dads. I mean family, whatever. If we're surviving together at that point, we're family now. We are a tribe. Our DNA is now intermingled. Our existence and coexistence has now become one. I am dependent upon you. You've become my right arm and I've become your left. We will, we will look at it from that perspective, I think. I think we have all these machinations of how these dreams of grandeur and what we suspect we're going to be like. But like you guys that have fought, in foreign wars, that the guy that usually talks about how badass he's going to be is usually not the guy who's badass. So I don't want to pretend that I'm going to, have this, hopes and dreams of grandeur when the apocalypse comes. But I also know that we've done a lot. We've done as much as we can do, I think, to get as far as we can get. And those that show up, the have-nots, those guys that you talked about earlier, that say, "Oh man, shit. Why would I do that? I'll just show up to your place." Man, they're gonna have a hard time coming.
Yeah, and Dade, I wasn't suggesting that about your brother. And I have family members in my family I wouldn't welcome at my gate. There's a few, but my brother's not one of them. So. I would certainly welcome it. Hey, so listen, guys, we've been at this long enough. There is, in the rest of the final part 4, we still have leadership structure, conflict mitigation, members who leave, and OPSEC, new membership, and what does the average month look like? And I'd like to get to all those things. We're just going to have to do another one. Like I said, we've been at this a long time today, and we'll also move on. So, but before we go, I'm going to give everybody just kind of a parting message, and then we'll schedule something in the next couple of weeks and get back to it if that's okay with you guys. Yes. All right.
Sure.
Parting words. What do you got, bud?
For me?
Yes, for you. Is there another date in the room?
Be water, my friends.
Be water. Yeah. Hitch.
Keep on planning, baby. I mean, just keep moving forward. I know a lot of you that are watching this channel and watching these videos. Some of you I may have even talked to personally and invited you to participate and take a look at this. You eat an elephant a bite at a time. Just get in there, figure it out, start taking bites, and just start going. You're never ever going to get here if you don't start.
Yep, that's
start today.
Advice. That's great advice. Bobby?
Once you're in the inner circle, you should have made some very good choices. So plan by making good choices. And a lot of these issues we talk about will self-mitigate themselves.
Yep, sounds good. My parting words is hold the line, don't give an inch. Tag out. See you guys.